This is live from my office, and over the past several episodes, I have tried to provide you with eyewitness accounts of 9/11 as we come to the 20th anniversary of that awful day. We're doing that again today, but first, a few words. Being at 20 years is remarkable to me. 9/11, 20 years gone by, and our life has changed and sped up. You think about all that's happened since that terrible day. 2 wars, the advent of social media, Facebook, iPhones, Androids. That's me, part of the good people. Near global financial Armageddon. We elected an African-American president, killed bin Laden, re-elected Obama, and then elected to the presidency a reality TV star who made lying every day about everything the number one topic in America. We saw America become more divided than at any time since the Civil War. There were mass shootings all of the time, and it became regular practice to practice surviving those in school. The racial divide got wider. A global pandemic killed millions and created another financial crisis. Joe Biden was elected, and Kamala Harris was elected vice president, the first woman to hold that job. And Trump rolled out his biggest lie yet, that the election he rightly lost was fixed. Kooks that bought the big lie rioted and stormed the U.S. Capitol, looking to possibly kill the vice president and Speaker of the House. And climate change brought storms and devastation and crazy weather. Yet with all that news, so much of it awful news, a singular truth remains. America is the greatest country in the world. Hope lives here. Opportunity lives here. And happiness survives. Now, it's easy to believe the worst. It's easy to be depressed, but where does that ever lead? The good that lives here can live on. I maintain it does live on. And my hope for you is that the past 20 years have had much more good than bad in your life and many happy anniversaries. Now, make no mistake, 9/11 is not a happy anniversary. But think about what anniversaries are. It's a moment in time to remember and reflect on the life you live. That's what this 9/11 is to me. It's not about hatred. It's not about failure. It's certainly not about politics and the selfish cowards who hold elective office today. And it's not about Muslims or the perversion of Islam committed by a few thugs to change our lives forever. You know, I try to remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, that children will one day live in a nation where they'll not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And that's all children, white, black, brown, all children. Look, let the sadness come. It's okay to cry. But please don't let this moment pass without telling your kids and your grandkids about 9/11 and how we came together as a country then. And why that's when we're best. We're still here. And we owe it to those who aren't. We owe it to those we lost to fight together for America. To have this nation be the country they lived in and so many died fighting for on that day and after. Today, former Chicago Police Superintendent Garry McCarthy joins me. On 9/11, he was one of the most important members of the NYPD, and he was there. He was there to see the second plane go in, to see the towers fall, and to help save lives. You'll hear his very compelling eyewitness account here next. Brought to you, as always, by David Hochberg and Team Hochberg. We thank you, David, for that. And we hope you'll listen everywhere. Wherever you listen to this podcast, subscribe, rate, review, and download for your parents, your grandparents, or anyone else new to podcasts. And you can always email me with comments about this show or any of the episodes. This is our 150th episode. Send any email you like to thecochranshow@gmail.com. We're going to take a break. We'll come back after this with Garry McCarthy joining me, his eyewitness account from Ground Zero on 9/11 on Live from my office. If you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance the one that you're in, You need to do what I did, what my family has done, and what many of you do every day. You call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. Tom, retired, Social Security income of $30,000 a year, and over $2 million in retirement assets, contacted 3 banks to refinance and purchase another home in Florida, and they all told Tom he didn't qualify. So he called Team Hochberg and got a free consultation. Team Hochberg helped Tom refinance his Illinois home and helped him purchase a home in Florida using something called an asset depletion loan. Now, you don't have to know what that is. You just have to know to call Team Hochberg. That's their area of expertise. So let's review. Before calling Team Hochberg, Tom was told by 3 banks, you can't refinance, you can't buy a new house. He called Team Hochberg, and Tom had his rate lowered, his monthly payment refinancing for his current home, and he purchased a new home. Team Hochberg helped thousands of my podcast listeners in the last year, and they can certainly help you too. Whether you want to use your retirement assets to refinance and purchase new homes or anything related to the money that revolves around and in and out of your house, you need Team Hochberg. Let them help you like they helped Tom. But they can't help if you don't call 855-56-DAVID or 56david.com. And a reminder to tune into Home Sweet Home Chicago, hosted by David, Saturday mornings on AM 720 WGN from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. A reminder, too, Homeside Financial is an equal housing lender, NMLS number 1124061. All right, now I'm live from my office. We continue with looking back at 9/11 from people who had an eyewitness view like none of the rest of us had. And I want to start by just saying, as Garry McCarthy joins me, it's a pleasure to talk to you again. And on behalf of every first responder, and you were there on that day, we're going to get into that story, but every first responder who survives and everyone who passed on that day, thank you, thank you, thank you. You are the best we have, and God bless the work that those men and women did on that day and that cops do every single day. And you know me well enough to know I mean that.
Oh, thank you, Steve. That's so kind. And the ironic thing about it is, and most people would never say something like this, certainly publicly, but there was no place else in the world that I would rather have been on that day. Of course, I was a deputy commissioner in the NYPD, and that's what I was supposed to be doing.
But there are, every civilian would go, okay, I get it. You run in while we run out. But when you say that's where I want to be, that's where I'm glad I was, that's a remarkable statement. So is it part of the duty that you took on at 22 and the responsibility that you assumed that you were glad you were there and you would have felt terrible if you weren't?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I think that's probably the easiest way to sum it up. You know, the interesting thing is my brother Jimmy was a New York State trooper who retired probably around 2000,
okay,
like shortly before. And I remember he caught up to me a few days later because it took that long to get in touch with me. And he was like devastated. He was like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? You know, you have this service thing.
Sure.
And you want to be in those places in time. And I mean, this goes back to my father. And I'm sorry to like divert and
totally
get a little
fine.
personal here. My dad was a World War II Marine who made the mistake of joining the Marine Corps Reserve in 1940. Got activated 8 months before Pearl Harbor. Was at American Samoa, Guadalcanal,
wow,
New Guinea, New Britain, Iwo Jima, and the occupation of Japan as a machine gunner. And then he came back to New York and became a policeman in New York. And one of the coolest things about what was a pretty good career of mine is that I had my father's shield as a patrolman in New York City when I went on the job in 1981.
Wow.
And my mom was a nurse, blue collar, civil servant, greatest generation. So those are the values that were imbued in us growing up as children.
Well, and the family that has that kind of duty in your blood, we see it over and over again. And using New York as the obvious example here, in the fire department, in the Port Authority, in the police department, so many legacies, right? So many grandsons, sons, and grandfathers that line is strong.
Yeah, and I've seen it every place I've gone. I mean, I ran the Newark PD in New Jersey for 5 years, and I met a guy who was fourth generation, who had his great grandfather's shield.
Wow.
And and I saw the same thing out here when I came to Chicago. And one of the things that I'm really happy about is the fact that I was able to help out some folks who wanted to get their dad's or grandfather's star. And I gave it to them because I realized how important that is.
There's no question about it. And again, I just want to repeat what I said before. Thank you for the service that every cop provides and continues to provide. And it breaks my heart to think of those that we lost on that day, but thank God they were there. And we'll never know how many lives they saved. So let me do a little history with you here. You're 22. You joined the New York Police Department. You work your way up over a course of years. And correct me if I'm wrong, but on 9/11, I think you were Deputy Commissioner of Ops. Is that right?
Yeah, Deputy Commissioner Operations.
All right. So in that position, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe on that day, you were a shadow to Rudy Giuliani all day, weren't you?
Yeah. So I actually got there right as the second plane hit the South Tower. It was one of the a day where a lot of things happened that I'll never forget, and a lot of things happen that I'll never remember. You know, the mind does a funny thing. It's probably a defense mechanism, but there's two, as best I can figure it out, there's probably 2 20-minute periods where I don't remember exactly what happened, but people told me things that I did.
Really?
Yeah. But the first thing about that day was I was coming over the George Washington Bridge as my cell phone, my car phone rang, and I got to see that. I guess it's an iconic picture of the North Tower with the gaping hole and the smoke trailing off to the east. And I was like, you know, how do you accidentally hit the World Trade Center? And I was very curious about it. And I picked up my driver in Manhattan and we headed down there. And I got to ground zero, basically right as the second plane hit. And I'll never forget this one. I'm on the citywide channel, and an emergency service unit officer says, and I quote, pretty close, he says, "Central, the second plane just hit the South Tower. Notify the military, we're under attack."
That's goosebumps.
And I was like, and I kind of looked at the radio like, well, wait a second. I don't know how to notify the military, so I don't think anybody else in the department knows how to do that. Yeah. And that was the first thing that really kind of blew my mind that day, where a lot of things happened that blew my mind. And the courageousness of the firemen and policemen that day was unbelievable. But so many different things happened. It was unbelievable.
Talk for a moment. I didn't mean to interrupt, but talk for a moment, if you would, about how you process this as a cop when you drill again and again and again for worst case scenarios, and no one ever could plan for this. No one ever would have known this was coming or known enough to drill for this. It just wouldn't happen. So you're making it up as you go along to some degree. But how do you have order and success when there's that kind of bedlam?
Well, you know what? It's funny. That's a great question, Steve. Well, what we used to do in the NYPD, and it started probably in the middle 90s, we created something called a disorder control unit.
Okay.
And we came up with these mobilization plans where there were 4 levels. You know, 1 was local, 2 was within a borough or an area, we would call it here in Chicago. And number 4 was citywide. And we drilled and drilled and drilled these mobilization drills where they would call a citywide mobilization on Canal Street. And each one of the 76 precincts in the city will be required to send X number of policemen and get them there. You put them on a roster and you put them out to wherever it is that they need to go. And I got to tell you something. That was such an important part of what happened on 9/11. The other thing that our greatest challenge, believe it or not, that day was communications, because when we lost the North Tower, we lost our communications because the antenna was up on top of the North Tower.
Right.
But that mobilization drill thing that we did for years and years and years, probably 6 or 7 years before 9/11, paid off in spades that day. There came a point where eventually, and I ended up, unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, since I could still talk about it, kind of getting caught in both collapses. But when I got back to police headquarters, we had no communications with what was going on in the street. And I literally took my Nextel. Remember those things?
Oh, yeah, of course.
and went back out to the World Trade Center and basically did the periphery of it. And what I found was mobilization points across the periphery of the World Trade Center. Brooklyn was massing here. Manhattan was massing there. The Bronx was coming here, Staten Island and Queens. And the officers were coming in, being given intelligent direction to go out and do things and getting posted up all across the area around there, which is why we were able to bring at least a semblance of order to that chaos.
And the job at that point is not processing a crime scene. I assume the job is to try to rescue as many people as possible and not get killed in the process yourself. Is that overstating it?
No, that's pretty much it. One of the things that I talk about or have talked about is the fact that I recognized the potential for collapse, but I didn't recognize the scope of how big that would be. I think it was 22 acres, which if you just try to picture 22 acres,
it's amazing.
Pretty darn big. And I parked like a block north of the North Tower, and it turns out it was this. So I set up this command post completely by accident. I pulled up to the scene, and I saw the mayor's communications person, Sonny Mandel, was standing on a corner, and I said, "Sonny, do you know where the mayor is?" And she said, "No, I don't." She said, "But Garry, I could really use some telephones. Can you figure out how to do that?" And standing next to her, literally standing next to her, was a retired detective who I knew, named Cutter, Billy Cutter. And I said, "Hey, Billy, can you help us out?" He says, "Well, yeah, I'm working for Shearson Lehman. Right here's our office." And we walked in, I looked around, and I said, "Well, Billy, guess what? We're going to take this over because this is a good spot for us to be." And we set up a command post. And I literally, after a time, it took us a while, we brought together most of the command staff of the NYPD, and unfortunately, most of the upper echelon of city government, including the mayor, who myself and Tony Carbonetti went out and took him literally from Vesey and West Street, which was right underneath the North Tower, and brought him over. And this is when people were jumping out the windows. So it was a pretty crazy scene. But I was actually there. If you've ever heard the story that Giuliani tells about talking to the first deputy of the fire department and Father Judge. Mm-hmm. Father Judge was a beloved chaplain in the FDNY. And he said, "Father, pray for us." And he said, "I always do." And Judge was dead. Judge was dead within minutes.
And I believe, if I'm right about this, Father Judge was the first person confirmed killed on that site on that day.
Yeah, I you know what? I don't know, but there's again another iconic picture with a guy named I believe it's Billy Cosgrove, who was a lieutenant on the job, who I knew, carrying his body off.
Right.
And Judge looked like he was sleeping, but he had been hit with a body, and that's how he died.
It's awful, just awful. It's part of that horribly awful day. Now, when you have the mayor's responsibility and safety as part of your overall duties there, Rudy Giuliani was very much in control of New York City, and I'm sure he wanted to do things and go places, and and do what he wanted to do, which may have been counter to what you needed to do as a policeman in that situation. Was that an issue at all?
No, we didn't get that far down the road. We got the mayor back to this command post, and we started bringing people in, and we started getting briefings on what was going on and what we knew was happening. And I was literally standing probably 10 feet from Mayor Giuliani, who was on the phone with the vice president at the time. And we learned that all the planes in the country had been grounded.
Right.
And that's when the South Tower collapsed. And, even though we were north of the North Tower, the South Tower basically fell on top of us. And
you had no sense. Did you have any sense of what was happening as it was happening?
No, I didn't know if it was another explosion.
Right.
You gotta realize, Steve, one of the things that I was certainly doing, and we were having conversations about, was, okay, so this is obviously terrorism. What's next?
Right, of course.
And we don't know if guys are going to come up out of the subways with AK-47s or what's going to happen. And thank God none of that happened. But it sounded like another explosion when it started. But then it went on for like 2 or 3 minutes, where picture sitting next to a freight train, one of these 100-car freight trains on a track, and it's like chung 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 chung. Right. And what I realized afterwards, and the room we're in is filling up with smoke, and the lights go out, and we're blacked out. And, it's like, what the hell is going on? And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking to myself, if somebody comes through that door, I'm picturing somebody coming in with a suicide bomb or something like that to blow up our command post, right? And eventually, when it finally stopped, we couldn't see what we were covered, blacked out, covered with dust, and Joe Esposito said, okay, everybody stay still and let me go take a look. And that's my buddy, the chief of the department. And the short story is, he said, nope, can't get out this way. Let's try the other way. The next thing you know, we're like a gaggle of ducks, if you will, going up, down, sideways, and so on and so forth. And eventually we found a way out. And I came back. I found a way out, and I came back to Joe, come back inside. And I'm like, Joe, I got a way out of here. And he's like, well, hold on, Gary, hold on. Are we better off outside or inside? I'm like, what? What?
Right, because you knew you knew you're in a position now where the other building could go, the one you're in.
I didn't even think, it wasn't even that much of a thought process, Steve. It was like, Joe, you're the chief of department. You have to get outside, and you have to make sure that we're taking control of what's happening here.
Right.
And he says, okay, but let's go back inside and make sure we didn't leave anybody. And I'm like, but Joe, we could get out right here.
Right.
And to his credit, he was absolutely right. We went back in. We found probably 6 or 8 firemen. I couldn't tell you. One of them actually threw up on me, and we took them out the back door on Barclay, at 150 Barclay. And then as we headed north on Church Street, the second building came down. So we were actually on the street as that happened, and we got to duck into an alcove, and it was like a nuclear holocaust is the only way I could describe it, with dust and stuff flying past us. It was pretty insane. I saw one of the tires from one of the planes ended up landing next to a friend of mine. I had a friend of mine who was a little bit dazed on the street, and I kind of grabbed him. He was a chief at the time, and he went on to run a couple of different police departments. Absolute fantastic guy. And I was like, Eddie, you okay? And he was a little bit dazed, and we joke about this. I had some water, and I kind of poured it over his eyes, and I claimed to have saved his life that day, but no way did I save its life. It's total just black humor that we use.
Right. But
one of the tires from one of the airplanes landed probably about, 50 yards from us. man, those things are big, and boy, do they bounce.
Sure.
And you just didn't know which way it was going to go.
So you have to reestablish a command post of some kind as quickly as you can to try to get a sense of what's going on. But how do you know where to go and what's safe at that point? Is it instinct?
Well, again, great question. So Joe Esposito and I, like I said, the chief of department, my partner, he and I are together, and we've got a little cadre of our staff with us. And we lost the police commissioner and the mayor and the first deputy, all went in different directions. So we're kind of arguing about where to go and what to do. And we decided to go to City Hall Park, which, if you're familiar with New York City, is a low-lying area with a fence around it, as I used the term that day, a defendable position,
right? Not
knowing what was going to happen next. We didn't want to go to police headquarters, which was only about 4 or 5 blocks away, because that was a target. So Joe and I decided we're going to go to City Hall Park and bring in some ESU folks with heavy weapons to make sure that we're not going to have a terrorist attack on the command post, which we're trying to set up at City Hall. And we got a phone call. Actually, something else happened first. We knew that all the planes in the country were grounded at that point. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden we heard airplanes. And we're like, we knew there was still a couple of missing planes. That's the last information we had. And, you know, Steve, in a nanosecond, 3 separate thoughts happened as I watched and I heard airplanes. First thing was, oh my God, more incoming.
Right.
And then I saw 2 F-16s going wingtip to wingtip up the Hudson River between, you know, the streets. And the second thought was, oh, thank God they're ours, to, oh my God, the military is protecting New York City.
Right. Right. I mean, it's just waves.
And we're in charge. And we're in charge.
Wow. Well, you know, the awesome responsibility of all of that and the adrenaline that pumped for that day had to be, you know, an incredible thing. But at what point, if there was a point, and, you know, you can speak in generalities for cops that you know about this, because I'm sure you've had the conversations through the last 20 years. Do you ever have time to stop and admit to yourself you're scared?
Not that day. And I've said this constantly. You know, the actual event that day was horrific, obviously. But you've got the adrenaline, you're doing your job, and you've been through crisis before. And this is obviously a mega crisis. But it was, you know, the aftermath of what happened that day was way worse because it droned on for months.
Right.
Recovering bodies, dealing with the families, going to funerals. We went to families gave up on recovering. The families, first of all, took up refuge in police headquarters, and we ended up back in police headquarters, and you know, dealing with them every day, and you know, celebrities coming in to visit them. It was actually really encouraging, and I'm going to say something that probably nobody cares about, but it's important to me. All the celebrities who came in, 99.9% of them were fantastic.
Right.
And you know who was the best, most down-to-earth, reverent individual, believe it or not, was Deion Sanders.
Is that right?
I mean, I was astounded. And I was with the guy for probably 45 minutes as he walked around and met with the families.
It's really cool to hear that.
Unbelievable. It is. And that's why I'm telling the story. You know, you see prime time on TV, but the man is way deeper than that. And I was impressed by that. But the funerals, so they would have memorial services because they gave up on, you know, and this is weeks later. And then we would recover a piece of DNA that would tell us that it was so-and-so.
Right.
And now they would have a funeral. So we lost 23 cops that day, 23 New York City cops, 37 Port Authority cops, 343 New York City firemen.
It's unbelievable.
And
and I know that many of them were people that you know and worked with.
Yeah.
And it had to be heartbreaking. So how do you not develop some measure of PTSD? And I'm sure many first responders have in some way, let alone the complications of working the pile. And we've seen the horrible effects of the cancers that came off that, all part of the sacrifice that first responders made on that day. But what about your own psyche? How are you able to not have the nightmares and all those things that we would expect?
I never said I didn't.
Okay. All right. Well,
I said I didn't. But you know what? I literally look back at my dad and his service and what that man went through and compare it to mine, and it's nothing compared to what he did. So, you know, the thing that really blows my mind, and I only did this last year, I've lost, there were 13 of those 23 cops who were personal friends of mine. Some of them I was close with. But since then, and I don't know what the number is today, so many hundreds of people have died from 9/11 related cancer.
Right.
And when I looked at the list last year, I stopped counting at 50 of my friends, people who I knew personally, because I've been out in Chicago this time and I lost track of it.
Sure.
And it absolutely breaks my heart. And I have a concern for that for my future. But you know what? As I like to point out, no self-respecting virus or cancer would live in this body at this point in my life.
Well, you know what? That's one of the reasons we have to salute what Jon Stewart has fronted with the first responders to get these cowards in Washington on board to take care of first responders. And we're going to put the charitable causes that are specifically related to that in the show notes at the end of this. I know I've kept you way too long here, but I really appreciate the reflections because I think it's important for people to hear. Through the years, people I know ask you about this all the time. Is there a story, a singular story, and maybe there's not, of somebody that jumps to mind from that day where you go, well, you need to know about this or that? Does anything jump out in that regard?
Yeah, too many of them. Too many of them. My friend Mike Curtin was actually a sergeant major in the Marine Corps, and he was in the first Desert Storm. His unit actually suffered the most casualties of any unit during that particular operation. He is the only person, to my knowledge, who recognized the potential of a secondary attack. Mm-hmm. And Mike, as we say, vested up. He got the heavy weapons. He was in emergency service. I was a lieutenant there. That's how I knew all these guys. Mm-hmm. And that was our SWAT team. And Mike, he went tactical, let's put it that way. And he was with my friend John DeLara, who had the locker next to me when I was a police officer in the 4-6 precinct in the Bronx. And those two guys died that day.
Well, it's crushing. It's absolutely crushing. And as we get to this 20th anniversary, I just hope that people do take time to talk to their kids and their grandkids about what happened on that day. Not for political reasons, to talk to them about the heroism that went on, about the people that just got up that morning and went to work and never got to go home, and about what cops and firemen do every day and why it's so important to say thank you when you get the opportunity. I'll let you go on this, and I really will this time. But is there something you want to say about where we are now and how people maybe want to process this 20th anniversary in regards to the men and women you served with?
Absolutely. After that day, we were considered quote unquote heroes.
Yep.
Which I think we all eschew. Right? But we had people cheering us on as we came down the West Side Highway. We had people, I'll never forget the visions from people from all walks of life, directing traffic as I was trying to navigate going from Upper Manhattan to Lower Manhattan to get to the scene.
Right.
There were businessmen. There were folks. One guy who stands out in my mind. If you've ever seen a heroin junkie, I'm quite sure he was a heroin junkie who was out in the middle of the street directing traffic. He did a pretty good job. He got me through there.
How about that?
But, Steve, 20 years ago, we were considered heroes, and today we're considered criminals. And, people are dying as a result of that. These are people who take these jobs to make a difference in the world. And some people do and some people don't. And the difference that's happening now is, I'm worried. We lost 2,800 people that day. And, we're talking about a 20-year war in Afghanistan where, unfortunately, and please don't think that I'm downplaying this, we lost 2,400 U.S. servicemen in a war.
Right.
By turning Afghanistan over to the Taliban, we're fostering probably more terrorism in this country. And I think anybody with half a mind could see what happened at the airport where the Taliban had the outer ring, and suddenly you got U.S. soldiers getting blown up and hundreds of people. These men and women do not deserve this. They do not deserve to be treated the way that they are. They get up every day, go out and do their best to make the world a better place. And, they're being castigated. It's really that simple. The world has changed so dramatically. People say to me, aren't you glad that you're not doing that job anymore? And I'm like, no, I would do that job for free because it's that important. And those men and women need to be supported. And that support is not coming today, certainly from elected officials, and in most cases, community at large, which, is putting us in a really bad place.
Yeah,
so we were heroes then, and it's just not okay.
It's not okay. It's not okay. And there's nothing I'd add to it. I think those words are as weighty as they need to be. And I hope we'll do this again. I really thank you for all the time you've given me. There's no proper way to recognize this anniversary with any words that I have other than to say one more time, thank you and all that you know, love, lost, and served with, and continue to serve with, remain friends with, and respect today. Thank you for being there.
Thanks, Steve. My pleasure.
If you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance a one you're in, do what we all do. We call Team Hochberg, a trusted local lender. Who are the we in we all? It's everybody I've worked with. It's my family. It's people who ask me for advice, and I tell them Team Hochberg is not only legit, they're the best in the business. That's not a recommendation you can get wrong, by the way. If you tell somebody, hey, that mortgage you're doing, the biggest financial transaction of your life, here's somebody you ought to use. And then they turn out to be, a shyster? Oh, you don't want a shyster. Then you are going to be on their blacklist forever. I have no problem recommending Team Hochberg. I have and I will. And after hearing thousands of Team Hochberg ads, Jody called for a free consultation. She's happy she did. Team Hochberg helped Dan and Jody secure a cash-out refinance, pay off most of their credit cards, and save over $2,700 a month. That's a lot of money. So before calling, Dan and Jody were overwhelmed and stressed out. After, David Hochberg eliminated over 70 grand of debt and saved them over $30,000 a year. Team Hochberg helped me and thousands of my podcast listeners use their homes and their home's equity to eliminate debt. They helped Dan and Jody, but look, they can't help you if you don't call. And if you think, well, Steve, you didn't really talk about my issue. Anything involving the financing, the refinancing, the money in your home, well, you need to pick up the phone because Hochberg has an expert that can help, or he'll do it himself. All he wants to do is save you a little money, like Dan and Jody. Can't help you if you don't call. 855-56-DAVID or 56david.com, 855-563-2843, or 56david.com for Homeside Financial, an equal housing lender, NMLS number 1124061. There are many charities tied to 9/11 that you could support. As always, I invite you to go to Charity Navigator. It's one of the great rating agencies, still I feel the top rating agency for charities. And they give a huge score to the Feal Good Foundation, named after John Feal, F-E-A-L, a U.S. Army veteran and retired construction worker. He was called to lead a team of demolition experts to work the pile at Ground Zero. On day 5, a steel beam fell on his foot, resulting in severe injuries, surgeries, big medical bills. Eventually, half of his foot had to be amputated, yet he was denied coverage again and again. That experience led him to start the Feal Good Foundation to help all emergency personnel who are injured doing their jobs in any area of need that they would have in their lives. John Stewart fought passionately with Feal to get financial help and get the James Zadroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act passed. They did it. They got it reauthorized. And many of you may remember when John Stewart hammered Congress to act, telling a poorly attended hearing, quote, "It's an embarrassment to the country and it's a stain on this institution. You should be ashamed of yourselves for those that aren't here, but you won't be." He closed the statement by saying, they responded in 5 seconds. They did their jobs with courage and grace, tenacity, humility. Do yours. And eventually they did. They reauthorized payments to take care of those who continue to get sick and die from working the pile at 9/11. If you can help, I hope you will. Go to fealgoodfoundation.com, F-E-A-L, fealgoodfoundation.com. I would also encourage you, if you have the opportunity to get to New York City or are in New York City, to visit the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. It is absolutely amazing. And if you were old enough to remember 9/11 as an adult, it's incredibly moving. It's incredibly, crushingly sad. But it's something everyone should experience. And I hope at some point you will. I want to say thanks to Garry McCarthy for telling his stories here, to Ross Cochran for producing Live from My Office as always. He was a 5th grader that day, and we talked about it the other day in my house. And again, I hope you'll talk to your kids about 9/11. Lastly, life is short. None of us knows how long we're going to be here. It's not easy, but do your best to enjoy each day and to look for the good in people, and just to try to make tomorrow better than today. God bless the heroes we lost and those that are still here, and the families that lost people they loved. And God bless you. We're better together. It's that simple. I know it's not easy, but we have to try. Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, and God bless America.
Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event, and occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Head to cochranshow.com for more.